many times I think professionals in the workplace want to just get the parties together as soon as they can to resolve the conflict. If we could just get in a room and talk about it, everything would be okay, is the sort of the feeling. And usually what happens is that people get emotional and they try to persuade each other of their story, and nobody is really listening.
Welcome to the Mindful Communication Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Miller. And on today's episode, we interview Judy Ringer. Judy is the author of the book, Turn Enemies into Allies, The Art of Peace in the Workplace. She provides conflict communication and presentation skills training based on mind-body principles from the martial art Aikido, in which she holds a third-degree black belt. What I loved is how smoothly Aikido integrated into every area of Judy's life, as she goes into in the interview. And so no wonder that Aikido eventually integrated into her ability to communicate with others and herself. And that's this theme that keeps appearing as I interview these guests and as we explore the topics of communication and connection, is that it integrates into every area of our life. It is all pervasive and so important. In the first half of this interview, we explore what exactly Aikido is and why it integrates so well into communication skills and dealing with conflict. Judy Ringer, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm happy to be here.
So we're here to talk about this upcoming book you have. By the time this podcast comes out, it will have already been released. It's Turn Your Enemies into Allies, The Art of Peace in the Workplace. And I want you to, now this is a unique communication book, and I was hoping that you can tell us a little bit about this book.
Well, of course, I'm happy to. It's unique, I guess, because of a lot of things. One is that I use the martial art Aikido. That's probably what you're thinking of. It's unique in other ways, I think, too. It's not like I'm the first person to use this amazing martial art as a metaphor. There are other people in the world who do this. Wendy Palmer, for example, Richard Straussy Heckler, Thomas Crum, my mentor and good friend. And I like to use Aikido in my trainings and coaching because it provides an elegant metaphor for how to deal with conflict. And that's because Aikido suggests that the attack is not an attack, that it's a gift of energy if we decide to reframe it that way. And so there are physical activities that I use in my programming that allow people to actually experience getting out of the way and using the energy of the attack as a gift and redirecting it. So in Aikido, we say blend and redirect.
And what's interesting is you mentioned how you're teaching these workshops, and I imagine your workshops are actually quite physical. You're actually moving with the students. Is that right?
Yes, I'm moving with them and showing them how to do movements. And another example is where I have two students face each other, and they perhaps in this face-to-face movement, they're demonstrating a more adversarial connection. And when they stand side by side, they move side by side, their connection is more like partnering. So the whole goal of the program is to have people move from an adversarial to a partnering position and to begin to turn their enemies into allies, as the book says, by asking questions, by adopting an attitude of curiosity, discovery, inquiry. And when we move from a need to be right to a more curious learning mentality, everything changes. And the cool thing, and I know you know this because you write a lot about it, is that it only takes one to make that change for everything to change.
So if a lot of your workshops are really about this physical movement, and I love that aspect of learning while you're moving, I think there's something to that. So what inspired you to put this actually into a book?
Okay, that's a great question. I have been doing a lot of coaching in the last few years with managers, HR professionals, and leaders who have employees who are very skilled technically, good at their job, and have difficulty with another employee in the workplace to the extent that it's causing disharmony and polarization in the workplace. And so they have asked me in various occasions and around the country to come in and work with these individuals and help them get along better, basically, help them come back to a more harmonious relationship. And as I've done this, I realized that the managers could probably do most of what I'm doing myself, all of it really, if they have skills or if they're willing to learn the skills. So about 5 years ago, I wrote a series of posts. I'm a big blogger. I love to write. And I think there were maybe 5 or 6 posts called The Manager as Mediator. And those posts got a lot of, reading and a lot of clicks. And I began to think if I could expand these, it could be a book and I could actually teach the leaders how to work with these individuals. So the other unique thing about the book, I think, is that it's a real model for taking to employees who can't get along and helping them figure out how to talk to each other, resolve their conflict, and come back to a more centered working relationship. What's different about the model is that many times I think professionals in the workplace want to just get the parties together as soon as they can to resolve the conflict. If we could just get in a room and talk about it, everything would be okay, is the sort of the feeling. And usually what happens is that people get emotional and they try to persuade each other of their story, and nobody is really listening. So what the book suggests and what I do when I work with people is I work with each individual separately. I teach them skills. I listen to their story. And as you also know, once people have a chance to really feel heard, they can let go of their version of what's happening and be willing to listen usually to somebody else's version.
Why is it that you think then, I've encountered this so many times in speaking to guests on my podcast and really dealing with conflict in my life and teaching it and learning it, why is it that we just immediately take that position of I want to be right rather than like that adversarial position rather than finding out what's going on for the other person?
I think there are many reasons, and I believe one of them is habit. I believe another is that we've been trained to do it. Our mentors early on, our parents, our teachers, the adults that we look to were usually doing it too. And it's sort of a knee-jerk reaction that we want to make sure that people understand us. And so instead of giving that gift to our partner, our conflict partner, as I like to call them, we want the conflict partner to give us the gift first. If you could only understand me, is what we're thinking, you would see how right I am. You would see how my version of things makes sense. And so we keep saying, yeah, but you don't really get what I'm saying, right? And the other person's doing the same thing. So I in the book and in some of my other posts, I've used another analogy, which is, the swinging door that goes into the kitchen in a restaurant, and somebody's trying to come out of that door and you're trying to go into the door at the same time. The door gets stuck and nobody can get through. And my suggestion in the book, and of course yours and anyone who teaches these skills, is that we listen first. We open the door, let somebody through, and then we can go through. Most of the time, when we're able to really listen and the other person feels heard and acknowledged, then, and I think acknowledgement is a sort of secret sauce in this, once people feel heard and acknowledged, they're usually willing to give you back that same gift. And if we only knew that, and it's so funny, and the reason I say habit is because I've been teaching this for 25 years and I still do it too. I still find myself, right? I know you're shaking your head like you do it too. I know it's like in the conflict, we just go into autopilot, and I am starting, I do catch myself in these important conversations when I actually think ahead of time, reflect on my purpose and what I really want to accomplish in this conversation. Then I can usually go into inquiry mode in a more easy way. I don't know if it's the same for you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that kind of aspect of yourself, that even after all these years of practice, literally teaching it, like it like the back of your hand, and yet we still slip up. It's so ingrained in what it is to be a human being and how it is that we're reacting. And it just comes naturally to us to want to get our point across rather than I love your analogy of the swinging door. Let the other person in first, and then go at it. So thank you for opening up and sharing that aspect of yourself.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I try to practice what I teach. And I will say, too, that over the years, and I started teaching it 25 years ago, but I've been working on this for a lot longer. I can tell a brief story about that in a second. But over the years, I have found that in general, conflict is no longer quite as disconcerting and quite as triggering as it used to be. And I have more options now. So the story I was going to tell is that, well, probably 30, 40 years ago now, I sold real estate. I was a sales agent. And in that field, you're always coming into conflict. You're usually in the middle of someone else's conflict, but oftentimes it's a banker or a building inspector or a family member who is you feel like you're in conflict with. So so I started to sort of hone my skills back then. I also had a manager at the time. A new manager came in and was trying to change things in the office, and I liked things the way they were. I felt like she was trying to control me, and I needed a lot of freedom. And I was about to leave the company, and someone talked me out of it because I was a top producer, and they wanted me to stay. So I went to this course, and that's where I found Aikido. This was back in the mid '80s. I started to practice Aikido, then later on in the '90s, and use this approach. What I wasn't able to do back then, which I have more skill about now, is being assertive. I'm an accommodator by nature, and I love to make people happy. I don't think that's such a bad thing. However, if that's the only tool in your toolbox, then there are going to be times when you feel like no one's listening to you, but only because you haven't actually tried and haven't actually said no or asked for what you wanted or expressed your opinion. So I've learned some skills to be assertive, and I've learned that I can still accommodate that, but now it's a conscious choice. And that's what's so interesting, that now when I accommodate, I have to think to myself, am I doing this because it's my habit, or am I doing it because I mean to, right? And I think that's the key to everything I teach, which is that we can be more intentional about our communication, about how we extend our ki. So Aikido means the way of blending or harmonizing with energy. Ki, the middle syllable, is energy, life force. In Chinese, it's qi. In Japanese, it's ki. And do means the way, and I means harmony. So Aikido, the way of blending or harmonizing with energy. And I think the main message of Aikido is that that we're always giving, extending ki. We're alive. As long as we're alive, we're giving and extending energy. So how can we do this more purposefully, more intentionally, more consciously? Stop those knee-jerk reactions. Catch ourselves in the middle of them, because they're always going to be there. Would you agree?
Absolutely, I would agree. And I'm on this lifelong journey, as it seems that you are as well. And it seems like one of the keys is we're not trying to necessarily master it. We're just trying to gradually become more present in our conversations and less reactive. And that will just bring way more peace and happiness to our lives.
Yes. How do you do it? I'd love to hear how you do it, and I'm happy to share what I teach about that if you think your listeners would be interested.
Yeah, I think I actually use a very similar approach to you with the Aikido. That's why I was so fascinated by your take on it, because I don't know much about Aikido. I have a friend who's been practicing for many years, and so I understand the basic philosophies of it. But it sounds like a kind of similar approach. It's really just about the power of listening. And it's really that knee-jerk reaction. And that's why I loved your swinging door analogy, is that we always just want to push our story forward. And there are just tons of, I know that I'm making tons of assumptions all the time. And it's really about, in that moment, checking in with my body, knowing that something is up, and just like taking a quick breath and going, okay, well, actually, you tell me first. What are you seeing in this? How are you feeling about this? And then I have a chance to share, because once I already know what I'm going to say. And when it comes to the other person, I have no idea what they're going to say. So it's really about getting Real curious. I'm all about kind of the inquiry, the listening aspect of it, which is a practice to say the least. Yeah.
So agree with that. And I think I can tell by the way you're expressing this that you've also found how powerful it is to actually listen and hear people's stories, especially when it's someone that you're sure is wrong, right? And you're sure just doesn't get it. And when you listen, you just get this whole other point of view that you never imagined that you would.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about how effective some of these learnings have been for students, because Aikido has been a huge part of your life. You've been practicing it for many, many years. You've really integrated the principles into your life as a whole. How about a student coming into your workshop or just reading your book? How effective do you think it's going to be to start integrating this? How immediate do you think the benefits of this practice will be?
That's a great question, Jonathan. And it depends on a couple of things. There are a couple of answers, and they're all swirling around here. But one of them is it depends on how much you practice. I am fond of saying that we are good at what we practice, and if we are getting angry all the time, letting things trigger us, becoming emotional, and letting those emotions drive us, and we don't stop it, then we're getting really good at that, and we'll continue to get good at that because that, in a sense, is what we're practicing. However, if we want to, and we are really goal-oriented about this, we can catch ourselves in the middle of beginning to react sooner and sooner. We can start to sort of go backwards and go, what do I do just before I become emotional? Is my body tense? Is my breathing stop? Do I stop breathing? If I can catch myself, I can just start breathing, and that changes everything. And I've found that students, after my workshops, they'll write me, they'll email me and they'll say, I was about to advocate. I was about to keep pushing for my way. And I saw the exercise where we moved from facing each other to standing side by side. And because I remembered that movement, I decided to listen instead. So even in a short, say, half-day workshop, people, and that's why I love experiential education so much. It's not just about listening to me talk. When people get up and physically move, something happens in their bodies. And even watching other people move, watching me demonstrate it, they now have a visual recollection of what they want to do in another way. So yes, it can happen very quickly, and we'll lose it quickly too if we don't practice. I guess that's the short answer.
You're listening to the Mindful Communication Podcast, and today we're interviewing Judy Ringer. It's been wonderful to explore how this martial art of Aikido integrates so well as a philosophy of life and ultimately translates as a way to relate to one another. In the second half of this interview, we continue to explore how Aikido can impact the way that we relate to others. We also talk about Judy's book, and we look at the implications of the virtual world on interpersonal communication. You talked a lot about this idea of attacking, not seeing it as necessary adversarial, but as energy coming towards you and kind of partnering and dancing with it. And I love that analogy. And that is a huge mindset shift for us to take. Seeing conflict really as a tool or as a lesson rather than something to defeat or conquer. So what would you say is the first step to start this mindset shift?
Well, let me go back to the Aikido model for a minute. So let's say the energy, I'm standing there, the energy physically is coming toward me in the form of a punch, right? So my initial reaction is to block that punch, like you might see in street fighting or other martial arts, and then to punch back. Verbally, the punch might sound like, that's a stupid idea, Judy. The block might be, no, it isn't. Your idea is stupid, and that's my punch. And this can happen, it does happen. That's a stupid idea. No, it isn't. It's a great idea. What are you talking about? Right? And so we're into the fight. So in Aikido, first of all, physically, here comes the punch. If you can imagine, if your listeners can imagine, a punch is coming toward my face. instead of trying to block it or running away from it, I pivot just slightly so that I'm now not in danger anymore. The punch goes by me. I can see it go by me. And now I enter into the side of the attacker and I redirect that energy. So I'm now leading it. This is very much a leadership art. Okay, so that's the physical model. Now, verbally, the stepping off the line, that's the important piece. The first thing that happens in Aikido is I don't want to get hit. So I step off the line. I turn sideways just a little bit so that that punch goes by me. And yet I don't run away. I stay connected. So I move from a resistant position to a connected one. And the way this happens, I guess, mentally, the mental shift you're talking about is if I've gone into the conversation with a purpose, let's say I know this might be difficult, and I go into that conversation thinking, what do I really want to accomplish here? When that punch comes, I'm more easily able to step aside because I have my purpose, which let's say my purpose is to learn more about where this person's coming from and so try to solve the problem. So then I'm going to not take it personally. I'm not going to take that's a stupid idea personally. I'm going to say something like, well, what makes you think it's stupid? What specifically don't you like about it? So I think it's easy for us, you and me, to say, ask a question and listen. What's difficult is the mental shift, and that's what we're getting at here. This is, I need to have a purpose that is bigger than winning the contest. Now that's, as I said, easier when we're entering into the conversation with a purpose and we know we're going in. It's a little more, takes a little more practice if we're not expecting it. And someone just out of the blue, we're sitting in a meeting or something, and someone comes at us out of the blue with an attack, a verbal attack, or an attitude attack, as I like to say, some sort of passive aggressive, eye rolling or something. And so the more I'm practiced at centering myself, and I use that phrase and a lot in my writing, in my teaching, the more centered I am, the more I'm able to catch myself about to react, take a breath, and just listen or ask a question or just not react. Just take 3 seconds before I say anything. Because centering is a practice all its own. There are a lot of books now around mindfulness and how to practice it, and it's the same thing. There are ways to commit to a practice every day, like mindfulness meditation, like prayer, like just quiet sitting, where I just am quiet for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. There are apps that are really useful for that today. If your listeners really want to practice this in a committed way, centering and being able to catch ourselves mid-reaction, stop, become more relaxed, less tense, less stressed in conflict, then I could recommend the Calm app, CALM. It's a great app. Headspace, I understand, is also a really good one. Insight. These are all ways to begin a meditation practice. There are lots of books on the topic as well, and classes. So meditation, let's say, quiet sitting every day. I begin to reflect, I begin to catch myself before I react, and I become a less stressed person in general. There are also little rituals, centering rituals I create for myself. So in the car, where I'm more apt to be triggered by bad drivers, when I get in my car and I put on my seatbelt, I think I center myself. I think centering belt to the seatbelt instead of just seatbelt. As my garage door goes down, I just take 5 to 10 seconds to just center myself before I pull out of the driveway. It's a ritual. At a stoplight, I catch myself tense because I'm late and I wish there wasn't a red light. I catch myself, I take a deep breath, I relax, I look around, I'm in the moment now instead of trying to get through this moment to get to the next one. Another one is when my phone rings, I take a moment to listen to the sound and take a breath before I pick up. So these are all things we can do for ourselves so that in the moment, we can be more spontaneously centered because we've been practicing and we know how to catch ourselves. We can also become, and I think this is maybe one of the best practices, is to become very, very familiar with our uncentered state. What do I do just before I'm reactive? How do I know I'm not centered, that I'm about to say or do something that I'll regret later? When we become familiar with that, we can do something about it.
I think there's something magical about a practice like Aikido because it's so physical. You mentioned understanding our agitated state and maybe our more centered state. And with a physical practice like Aikido, you become more in touch with the body. Even in meditation, if you're doing body scans, you're becoming more in touch with the body. And I think there's an aspect that's really important in that when we want to be less reactive and more peaceful in life and enjoy our life more, we want to really get in touch with our body and how our body is reacting and actually listen to it. What do you think about that?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Any physical activity like that gets you in touch with your body. I'm also a singer, and that, though I don't write about it as much, has also put me in touch with the blocks, the tensions that I hold physically that keep the voice from coming out in a fluid way. And I could say the same thing about our, verbal or when we speak. What keeps our voice blocked? What keeps me from entering the conversation that might be difficult, but that I might be able to use to resolve a conflict? So, singing, swimming, running, anything that gets you in your body, and you do you do with the intention of sort of centering yourself every day, can be really useful, I think.
Your book is geared toward managers, leaders, but generally the workplace. Now, one thing that is happening in the workplace, a trend that I'm seeing, and I think a lot of people are seeing in the workplace, is the impact of virtual communications on communication and on interpersonal communication. So a lot of your conflict, it seems like it's something that would happen between two people that were speaking face to face, and yet we're finding ourselves more and more splintered by this virtual world where we're sending off emails and we're misinterpreting emails and we're misinterpreting text messages and whatnot. So what do you think the implications of this virtual world are going to be to understanding the principles that you're teaching? How do you think people can kind of grapple with both?
Right. Well, it does make it more complex. I think that we can blend and redirect in lots of different ways, even through email, for example, or, the virtual world also includes face-to-face. And I encourage all of my workshop participants and the people I'm coaching that in conflict, whenever you can, to do it face to face. I know people, and I know everyone listening does too, where you have an office right next door to them, but you'll send them an email instead of going over and say, hey, can we talk about what happened yesterday at the meeting, right? So whenever you can, go talk to them. Try not to do conflict by email. I usually suggest if the email goes more than a couple of different iterations back and forth and things are getting worse, stop. Call them up on the phone. Try to do a Skype or Zoom or something that will get you face to face. If you're not in the same building, if you're in the same building, even in the same town, go and try and get with them. Ask them to have a cup of coffee with you. Can we have a cup of coffee together? Build trust in all kinds of ways that you can when you're together face to face, so that when these things come up and you're back in virtual space, you have some foundation of trust that you can build on. And in an email, there are actually lots of things you can do. So email is, trainers like myself who do experiential training know the statistics that about 75 to 90% of our communication is nonverbal. So think about email. About 75 to 90% is left out. So people can make up whatever they want to when they read that email. If they're in a bad mood, they might make up that you're in a bad mood too when you wrote it, and you might not have been. Number one, read the email over and over again to yourself. Try to anticipate how they might be reading it. Don't just jot it and send it off. If it is a difficult scenario, don't even send it right away. Put it in your drafts and read it again in an hour, 2 hours, preferably the next day before you send it. Because that gives you time too to consider, what is my purpose here? In the book and in my trainings in general, purpose is a big piece. You might guess that since I've mentioned it so many times, but just kind of trying to decide, what's my purpose for sending this email? Do I just want to get back at the person? Do I want to punish them in some way, make them feel bad? Or do I really want to try to resolve the conflict? And then depending, emojis I think are usually overused, and yet occasionally they can be useful, right? To let people know. If you use the smiley face all the time, then people might not pick, people might get tired of it. But if you use it seldom and you really mean it, you're not just being sort of like, I don't know, passive aggressive. You can be really passive aggressive with those emojis. If you really mean it, then it might come off okay. The other thing I do in emails is I hardly ever go right into the content. How hard is it to say, I hope you're doing well today? Good morning. How's your day going? Whatever. And it doesn't take a long time to read it either. And it just sort of sets up the email in a way that's a little more palatable. I don't know. Maybe you have some tricks.
I heard a few things from what it is that you shared. First, the first part of this was the idea of when you can get face-to-face. That is kind of what you want your main priority to be, especially if, like you said, there's a few iterations back and forth. The second part that I really heard, and I think is really going to be the big struggle moving forward, and has been a struggle, is this wrestling between efficiency and connection. Because when we want connection takes time. The idea of waiting a couple hours to send off an email, for some, seems preposterous. It's not the most efficient use of my time. I might forget to send that email. Whatever it is that might come up, I want to just get this thing resolved and move on with my life. And the idea of taking my time and taking breaths and all that stuff is going to be a real challenge for a workplace that is demanding and wants us to move faster and more efficiently and produce more and more, right?
Yes, well said. And I love what you said. It's a conflict really between efficiency and connection. I think we're losing our connection so fast, human connection, as we get more and more connected to technology, as wonderful as it is. And I think anything we can do to increase that connection, maybe you send the email right away, but you say, hey, do you want to have a cup of coffee later? Let's to really flesh this out, or if you can. And if not, let's do a Zoom. Let's do face-to-face on this and really talk about it. It seems like I'm concerned that we're becoming adversarial about this, and I really don't want that to happen. You can put a contrasting statement in an email. I really don't want you to think I'm upset about this, because I'm not. I just want to solve the problem. So I think that would help a lot, to say what you don't want to happen, what you do want to happen.
That's a great little suggestion there. Judy, how can our listeners connect with you?
Lots of ways. My website is my name, judyringer.com. I know that'll be on your podcast. I blog a lot, so they'll be able to sign up for my blog there. The book, obviously, it gets tomorrow is the release date. I found that Amazon is starting to mail them today, so that people actually receive them tomorrow. So that's kind of cool. So the book is there. I think that people could just email me too. You can contact me through my website as well. And I'm happy to respond when I can. Usually I can, but sometimes it takes me a couple of days. I'm also on all the social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. And JUDYRINGER.
And is there any learnings, maybe just one in particular, that you want to give to listeners that they can apply to their lives this week?
Yes, I thought about this. And when in doubt, stop, ask a question, listen, and summarize.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Judy, I can't thank you enough for coming on to the show. I'm feeling so energized by our conversation. It sounds like we have a lot of the same points of view, even though we come, from different places to the same conclusions. And I'm really grateful for your contribution to the world with this brand new book and all the work that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. This has been a lot of fun. I enjoyed every minute.
Big thanks goes to Judy for coming on to the podcast. We're on a mission to help spread the word about the importance of communication and connection in our society. If that aligns with what you're up to, if you want to help out, please share the podcast with family, friends on social media. Also, be sure to subscribe and give the podcast a great rating and review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. That will help tremendously. You can get lots of communication tips on our Facebook page at Mindful Comms and on our Instagram page at Mindful Communication. Also, be sure to head over to the website mindfulcommunication.me to check out the programs and free content that we're offering there. Today's theme music was provided by Shinogo. You can check out Shinogo's music wherever you get your music. And editing was done by Maya Miller. Once again, I was your host, Jonathan Miller. Thanks for tuning in.